Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast. So this afternoon, I am delighted to welcome Chris Rosimus and Pete Tierney. So welcome to the podcast, guys.
Cheers, Rob. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Rob. Pleasure. So part two of the unofficial FA special after Bryce has come out this week. But a little bit of intro from you both. I'm going to come to you, Chris, first. Background, education, and what you're currently doing at the FA.
Well, yeah. Depends if it's the short version or a long version. I'll try and go the middle version for you. I guess I got my two careers almost. My pre-nutrition days, very briefly, before I got into nutrition, I used to be an alarm engineer for 6 years, believe it or not. And then I got into nutrition quite late, so I decided at 23 I was going to make a change and step into the world of education again, re-education, and I do the performance nutritionist. So I guess that was the previous nutrition career. And alongside that, I was coaching football, and it's football coaching that sparked my interest in nutrition. So I embarked on a degree back in 2006 now at Manchester Metropolitan University. Did a master's in Sheffield. And I've now just completed my postdoc professional doctorate with University of Kent. So that's the education piece. And my previous employment in nutrition, I spent the first 6 years of my career at the English Cricket Board, so leading the nutrition department at the ECB, whilst consulting in football and various clubs, including Leicester City. And then 3.5 years ago, I joined the FA to lead the nutrition department across the men's and the women's pathway there. So that's kind of where I am now.
Nice, mate. Over to you, Pete.
Not quite the same background as Chris, but started out actually as a strength conditioning intern in Leinster Rugby, and then spent 5 years there as a sports scientist, and then just over 2 years ago joined the FA as a physical performance coach and sports scientist. So yeah, that pretty leads me there. So that's definitely the short version. And then education wise, I've done the kind of degree and masters, and then I've submitted a PhD thesis and just looking to wrap that up hopefully in the next couple of months.
What was the PhD? What was the PhD on?
It was on applied sports science and rugby union. So predominantly a lot of all of the data was collected during my time in Leinster, and the last year and a half, 2 years have been just kind of writing up since joining the FA. So bit of a workload. I wouldn't recommend changing jobs during a PhD.
Nice, mate. Nice. Well, like I mentioned before, Bryce set us up perfectly with the part one, talking about the other 22 hours. Is how he termed it.
Yeah.
I'll come to you first, Pete. Just on that, what does that mean? What's that? Where does that come from? Where do you guys fit into that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the other 22 hours is a project that I've definitely inherited. It certainly isn't one that I've created. The credit definitely goes to Bryce and Ruth and Ben, who've been working on this with me for the last couple of years. But it comes from, like a focus on the other 22 hours to go with the name, but the focus on everything outside of training and matches. So the behaviors and what happens from a sleep, recovery and nutrition perspective in the other 22 hours of the day. So a lot of it is based on those three pillars. And a lot on athlete behavior as opposed to strictly everything being prescribed, because they spend a lot of time obviously on their own. They need to have good understanding of sleep, nutrition and recovery, and also some good behaviors around those things as well. So definitely a framework that has been created and applied to the teams, as opposed to a strict set of rules or instructions.
How difficult is that when you say behavior change? How difficult is that given that they're only with you guys for such a short period of time?
It does make it harder, and that pretty makes us as a department work a little bit harder to create engaging education environments for them to learn. Myself and Chris, even earlier on, were speaking about attainment of knowledge and stuff, and that next step as well. But it definitely does make us, or challenges us, to be a bit more creative about how we engage players. And even what we started to do with a couple of the squads, with Ben and some of the teams as well, the staff teams, was like this project I see anyway as not just a player-facing project, but actually a staff-facing one as well. And I think, future desired state would be if every team and staff team as well was using the Under 22 Hours framework and language, and your staff are discussing how they're recovering, sleeping, and eating, using the same language as the players would as well. So that's probably end state in mind anyway.
So is there anything you can give us any examples of how you would educate players and staff that, like coaching staff that maybe in the younger age groups, to adopt this framework? And we'll get onto the framework in a second.
Yeah, there was one. I mean, it's probably a little bit different now during current times and education. Some of them, like, I guess when you think, and even Chris will definitely go into a bit more detail on this, when you think of education, it doesn't always have to be the physical performance coach standing at the top of a room or at the front of the gym and explaining something. That is definitely a method, but it could be doing something as part of education and trying to teach them by doing and experiencing. And that would certainly be the focus of the curriculum, around exposing players at younger age groups lower down the pathway, and then starting to embed that as they get older. So with the staff, some of that, when we tried to do it, has been a little bit remote. So trying to get them to connect, I guess, the sleep recovery, nutrition concept to their job or their performance, which is like, I mean, coaches and staff need to be performing just as well as players, but albeit a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. So just bringing you in, Chris, where does nutrition fit into this?
Yeah, it's all connected really in various aspects, but the main focus of the nutrition element on the Under 22 Hours is all around that recovery side of things. So the minute they come off the pitch and finish that match, what then are the nutritional steps that you'd want to put in place? You'd want to invite the players to take advantage of, and then everything around that. So building up to that, then the next meal that they would have, what supplementation versus food first options might you want to put in place for the players, and then head towards pre-bed sleep nutrition. It's putting in some good basic nutrition interventions, well delivered, specific to that recovery that you're trying to achieve. So we then try to plug our goals from the nutrition department, and then shape them and weave them into the 22 hours. Because when we talk about curriculum later, that's crucial to ensure we've got some coherent delivery across the different focus blocks. I know that Bryce mentioned in the previous podcast that we've installed. It's all about the fuel to us recover so it can go again.
Nice. I mean, I'll come to you on the kind of philosophical side, Pete, in a second, around the things that you've mentioned as sleep and recovery. But how important is it, Chris, for you to educate the staff? I mean, I don't know how many nutritionists are there at the FA that spread across the groups?
Well, 2 full-time staff. So me and another member of staff, James Moorhen, and we have a nutrition consultant as well. So it's a very, very it's a small team, and our challenge in the last 3 years has been delivering our message and vision across the men's and women's pathway. So with that, does create challenges around delivery, and we've not got the luxury of having a nutritionist on every camp with every team delivering what we want to deliver. So then the engagement of how, first and foremost, our colleagues, our PPCs are crucial. So how do we get those individuals on message with what we want to deliver, and that message then spreads to the coaches. And then it's how creative can we be with our delivery at each level of the pathway. So how we would deliver this message to the 15s at the YDP level would be a different style of delivery at the seniors, but the theme and the message has to be the same, so it's consistent. So then it's the resources that we use, that we put together, that create some sort of common and consistent message that everyone can get access to. And then in time, over time, that's where you want to see the education attainment and ultimately some sort of change in attitudes and behaviours towards nutrition.
Is there any examples you could give us how that process differs across, say, women's seniors to men's 15s? Yeah, that big gap of how you communicate things differently.
So we'll delve quite quickly into that. This is why the curriculum was created. So I guess now allow me, if we can, just to go back to Bryce's conversation where he was talking about pick, train, play. That was something that was brought in and we had, and it was a philosophy that we all bought into. And then the next challenge was, well, how do we deliver this to make sure that it lands across various age groups, and what is being delivered is relevant to the cohort of people that you're talking to. So through that, it was looking at curriculum frameworks developed by schools. That's how I approached it. Now, Bryce mentioned that he tasked me with creating a curriculum for the department. That started from me creating a curriculum for the nutrition department. So me and my colleague James, we looked at what we wanted to achieve and set out on this journey to create a nutrition curriculum. And it is through that early process that I started to realise, actually, I don't know a great deal about curriculums. I'm not a teacher. I've taught football coaching, I've taught nutrition, and I've lectured. But to think of a curriculum, how I now know what a curriculum is, was miles away from what I thought it was at the time. So it was just through questioning and learning, asking experts in curriculum design, primary schools, colleagues who I know who are teachers, what is a curriculum? And it was actually the learning outcomes that were the most crucial thing. So they have to be specific to the age group that you're dealing with. Now we had our vision, what we were trying to achieve. So how do we deliver that same message to a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old? So it was thinking really deeply and really carefully and painstakingly about specific learning outcomes for a 15-year-old. How is that subtly different up to 17, 18, up to a senior player? And then once you got our heads around that, and we're very, very happy with the outcomes we wanted, it was then thinking about how will we deliver this then? So, for example, nutrition. And the theme of nutrition is the same theme throughout, whether you're a 15-year-old at the YDP level or a senior player and the women's pathway who I've been working with. What we're trying to achieve, our goal is that all our players can fuel and recover effectively to cope with the demands of international football. That's what we're trying to achieve, and we've really narrowed our focus down to kind of three kind of most important days, we believe, in an international window: the day before a game, the day of a game, and the 22 hours after a game. So all our nutrition work is centered around those 3 days. So whether you're a senior player or a 15-year-old, that's the message that we're delivering. But then what we deliver will be slightly different and relevant. So 15-year-old will get information around the basics of fueling, on what carbohydrates do you need the day before a game. And it's very basic advice. And we have a system in place called food formations, where players can construct a very basic meal, which is more carbohydrates than proteins, for example. At the senior level, it's still that theme, but it's all about individual fuel planning. So they'll have individual fuel plans, which will work with them to create specific bespoke carbohydrate targets and teach them how to put that together very accurately. So it's exactly the same message, but delivered at a very different level based on their journey in the pathway.
Nice. And we'll come. I mean, you've gone into a bit of detail there, but we'll come back onto the curriculum later on. But I just want to get Pete back in.
Yeah, apologies.
No. It's great. It came up, and it was absolutely. Yeah, it's more of a conversational rather than going through the structure as it was.
Feel free to rein me in anytime.
No. Keep going. So Pete, on the sleep side, and this is something that we've spoken about briefly with your posts on LinkedIn about the Oura Ring and a few other consumer devices. When it comes to sleep specifically, what's your kind of philosophy around trying to help athletes maximize that sleep?
Yeah, I'll go back. I'll diverge from the wearables and go back to the kind of framework, because I think it'll feed into it. But
sounds good.
In the other 22 hours, the framework that we're using is the 4R framework, and the 4 Rs are react, regenerate, restore, and refine. So if we think of that as phases within the framework, then we start to see how sleep, recovery, and nutrition fit into the 4 of those phases. So it's not to say one phase is one day, because in an international setting, you might only have 2 days between games. So you can't have a day dedicated to each phase. So it might be half a day, or you might have a day that has 2 different phases. But if you take React as an example, for me, trying to plan recovery or do the 22 hours, and I'm thinking about reacting from a game, for example. Okay, that's thinking, okay, what are the nutrition and recovery interventions or strategies that the players need immediately after a game, and also then what are the sleep needs that they need straight after a game. So that will vary depending on the squad that you're with, but also the time of day. So unfortunately, sport is dictated by TV probably a lot of the time and fixtures. So it's trying to work out what's best suited to the individual, but also around the constraints of the environment you're in and the competition and stuff. So I guess to get onto the sleep stuff, the tracking is probably one that's just skyrocketed in the last 2 years around wearables and stuff, and there's a bit more, and that's probably not the focus of where we're at the moment. The whole concept of the other 22 hours is predominantly focusing on brilliant basics and being brilliant at the basics of sleep recovery and nutrition. So the wearable end of it is probably very bespoke and only for those players that need it. So largely it's about trying to educate them on good sleep hygiene, good sleep behaviors. And we've got Luke Gupta in as a sleep expert and consultant, who I think you've had on before.
Yeah, he's come on. Yeah, and Bryce mentioned him. Yeah. So someone like him coming in to help us develop that framework and education. And then we've developed a questionnaire that I guess tries to landscape the squads that we're in. So the wearable stuff and the sleep questionnaires, the wearables are only really as a result of identifying if players have a problem and if they need and want support. So that's probably people probably jump to that too quickly as opposed to trying to address the basics and the brilliant basics. So that's probably, if I answer your question, to go back that's probably where we start from. Which is what I just did. Jump to the end, jump to the end point. So in terms of education, I'm really fascinated to talk about education around sleep. And this is something that came up in the chat with Luke, because a lot of research, and it's getting very much into the public domain, the importance of sleep. But from on a day-to-day or camp-to-camp or contact-to-contact basis, especially with the younger athletes and the older ones, of course. But how do you go about that education process? And like you mentioned before, and Chris mentioned, there's an option to stand up in front of the group and you be that person, or there's other means and ways to go about that. How do you guys do that at the FA with regards to education of sleep?
So that probably is an example where there is a little bit of stand up and educate on some basics, duration, quality, timing. They're the three kind of buckets that we look to think about. But there's also different ways, I guess. If you're working with teams down the pathway where they need some, I guess, credibility behind it, you might need to get some resource from an expert like Luke, or even a senior player or a player from a different sport who, if they've voiced some sleep habits and stuff like that are positive, we could use different strategies like that. But a lot of it is around basics and trying to identify whether they can actually retain some of that information as well. So like one of the things that I've done on a previous camp was share some basic knowledge around sleep and sleep basics and behaviors, and then let the players after that develop their own sleep routine based off of the knowledge that I've shared. So it's not my sleep routine that I'm saying everybody has to do these three things a half an hour before bed, but at least, okay, they've had some generic education, and then there's some follow-up discussion around, okay, can you develop your own sleep routine of the things that you think you'll, one, commit to is probably the biggest thing. And then two, from what you think will actually help you sleep, and then just try to follow up with that on the next camp afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Just want to get you back in, Chris, with that link between sleep and nutrition. And it's something that came up in a chat with Shona Halson, and she dived a little bit into it. But she's obviously coming from a sleep perspective with an interest in the link between nutrition, and then you're coming from the nutrition perspective with a potential link with sleep. How do you guys, I suppose, bridge that gap between all the different elements of the other 22 hours so they all kind of look and feel as part of the same framework, which I guess links us back into how the curriculum is delivered and looks?
Yeah, I think it's the process of recovery that leads you up to sleep, I guess, is what we probably focus on before sleep. So it's how are they refueling that first hour first and foremost, in the second hour, and then that pre-sleep window is another opportunity to refuel and recover and stimulate some muscle repair overnight. So there's a recovery aspect to it that can help them recover overnight, and then wake up the next day in a better place. So it's making sure that they've got those brilliant basics in place first and foremost around that. Are they refueling properly? Are they taking the opportunity to eat before bed? And then the education piece comes in. Then what do they have before bed that's going to help with their sleep recovery? So it's, we have a food first approach very much. So that's the forefront of our mind from a nutrition point of view. And then down the pathway, it's things like basic things like pre-bed. It's yogurt, it's nuts and seeds, it's good whole foods. And then as we move further up the pathway in the professional development to the seniors, you start then looking at different supplements that might enhance sleep recovery above and beyond food, because they're at a level where there's evidence to suggest that might help. So that's where we might look into various products, for example, that might translate well into what we're trying to achieve, which is better sleep recovery. So that's how we look at it.
Just them three key timings that you spoke about, so the pre-game, the night before the pre-game, and the first 22 hours after the game. In terms of that day before, what's your thoughts and what's your recommendations to the guys? And does that change between age groups in that first of them three key touch points that you have?
Yeah, so match day -1, match day, and match day +1. They're the three areas that we focus on. That's our nutrition focus around. So the day before a game that's the start point in our education curriculum. That's the common theme is performance fuel the day before a game. So the message that we deliver all the way from top to bottom, it's exactly the same from the perspective of increasing your carbohydrate content the day before to make sure your muscles are loaded with glycogen so you can start the game fully fueled the next day. And as I alluded to earlier on, how we deliver that message is subtly different through the age groups. And like I mentioned before, certainly the YDP and the PDP level, it's more around good nutritional habits to construct what we call the food formations. And we have 3 food formations. One's the high fuel formation, one's the repair formation, one's the protect formation. So then we're starting to actually talk then about fuel periodization without going into too much detail on that. But we want to put a really good education system in place so they can understand the right time to have more fuel, more protein, more carbohydrate, and more vegetables based on what their focus is. So the day before the game, the education's all around the high fuel formation. And then as we get higher up the pathway, it's individualized fuel planning. So before the World Cup, for example, with the senior women's team, objective was every single player has a clear individualized fuel plan, and they know how to construct it. We can deliver those players to the pitch in an optimally fueled state. So that comes to carbohydrate targets based on body weight, and we call that at the top at a higher level of delivery Project 6G, because we want them to be consuming 6 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight, which is the lower threshold of high based on the textbook, but we've come from a place where we felt that was realistic and achievable. It does take a bit of work to consume that amount of carbohydrate. So it's the same message, just delivered differently up the pathway.
And how does that differ to what happens on match day?
So on a match day, it's we don't have the individualized planning. That's not our main focus there. We really want to get the day before right. So if they get the day before right, we baseline, at senior level, particularly in the women's team, we've baselined and profiled every kind of player's nutritional habits. So on the match day, that wasn't the big issue because they were tuned into eating more carbohydrate. So it's getting the day before right. They have their own routines as well. I mean, that's really important, particularly at senior player level. On the women's side, there's a lot of routine around nutrition. It's our job to work within that. We don't want to disrupt that too much, but if we can see some areas through your relationship that you build with that player that you might be able to subtly change, and you would look at that. But it's about topping up the fuel and then building into that game. And then on match day, we have very specific match day fueling strategies, which is part of our curriculum as well. So there's everything beforehand leading up to, and then it's okay, how do we fuel in-game as effectively as we can, particularly in a tournament situation where the game might go into extra time, because we want to guarantee fuel for 90 minutes to 120 minutes for 7 games for the duration of a tournament. So there has to be a very specific, evidence is there how much fuel you would need to fuel what we call the endurance event. And that's one of the analogies that we use in our curriculum to hook the players in, to get them interested in a particular concept that we're trying to deliver.
And last but not least, what comes post-game, and I'll bring you in, Pete, after that with regards to recovery. But in terms of nutrition, Chris, where does that then go nutrition-wise for that time immediately after games?
Yeah, so straight after the games, the players are all, again, pathway specific, what options are available. So down the pathway, we look for a food-first approach, so more milk-based products, for example, after a game for a protein carbohydrate. There's a combination of protein and carbohydrate. And then further up the pathway, then there's more nutritional products available that ultimately are providing the same thing, but they are delivered and packaged and branded slightly differently. But ultimately, it's the same. It's grounded in the same science. So really, we're wanting them to refuel and replenish that carbohydrate, and then recover with the right amount of protein, which then leads into a real meal within 2 hours. So one of the issues that we don't want to be suppressing appetite too much. We want to make sure that they're recovering right, they're taking the right amount of fuel, and they're still getting good quality nutrition as well through whole foods in that first 1 to 2 hours. And then, like Pete mentioned, it can change based on kickoff times. If it's a late kickoff, then you clearly got less time to eat. Appetite is a big thing. It becomes very, very individual. And what we're finding when you get to senior level, it's just a touch more generic down below in the pathway, because got the resource to work at individual level. But at senior level, it's incredibly bespoke, and you're working with individuals then to find solutions that work for them, that they can deliver consistently. Post
game, Pete, before sleep, what's happening in there? What's your kind of philosophy of what goes on in that, and obviously linking back to the framework that you guys have developed?
Yeah, so if we link back to that framework, it is, and like Chris said earlier on, it's how all of these different focus blocks fit in together. So it's not even looking at recovery on its own or nutrition on its own. It's okay, those two things on top of everything else. So if we look straight after the game, would be typically our react phase. Okay, so how are we reacting straight after the game finishes, whistle goes? So from a nutrition perspective, Chris has just shared some things, but from a recovery strategy perspective, typically want to look to blunt inflammation, especially in a tournament setting. If games is the outcome, or what you're trying to get, quick turnaround to games is the focus of that camp. So that would be one. So I know pretty debatable one, but like one that gets used frequently would be called water immersion. So that might be a suitable strategy, again, based on the game and the context of the camp. That's not to say cold water immersion or ice bath is suitable for every day and doing it on every recovery day or training day or everything else. But in that setting, after a game, that could be the best strategy to use. In the next phase, then regenerate. Again, like these aren't just days, but how you regenerate, you need to give back to accelerate the recovery process. So that might be, depending on how players feel, like cold or contrast water therapy. It could be movement session, it could be mobility, it could be various different things. And I think it comes back to, again, at different phases of the pathway. At YDP, it could be just about exposing them to different recovery strategies and trying to get them to understand. So whilst they're doing them, educate them on the benefits of different strategies, getting some feedback from them, and them trying to understand, okay, yeah, actually, when I did this after this match or this training session, I actually felt better than I normally do. Whereas when you get up the pathway, PDP and seniors, obviously it becomes a little bit more bespoke and more about them delivering really specific. So I think giving athletes choice in their recovery at certain stages is important as well. So again, like an example of that would be, and this is where we've had to work to collaborate with the team on camp, so physio, doctor, coaches, everything else. So if we can offer 2 to 3 different recovery strategies that we feel are suitable, for example, on a match day plus one, dependent on how the player feels. So if they feel tight or they feel sore, their recovery intervention might be different. So we can't give them a blanket approach. Some cases we do, we have to if we're limited on different things, but trying to give them options. And I think even just behavioral signs, if you give somebody a choice in something, okay, if you feel tight, we're going to put on a mobility session. If you feel sore, we're going to put on a contrast water therapy session, for example. If a player chooses something because they think that's going to have a benefit, it probably will have a benefit at the same time. So I think that's also an important step, which gives the physical performance coach on the camp autonomy in this thing. And Bryce uses that analogy in the other 22 hours around, well, in general around like, you know, the Christmas tree kind of decoration. So you've got this framework, and how you decorate it is up to you on camp, dependent on the constraints that you have, the opportunities that you have, the team, the tournament, the goals and objectives of the camp as well. So I'm kind of probably diverging a little bit away from specifically recovery after the game, but it's trying to paint a big picture of how it all fits into that framework, I guess.
Yeah, and what just remind me of the second 2 hours?
React, regenerate, restore, and refine. So It starts to go from reacting, and your immediate focus is recovery, and it starts to shift towards actually almost preparation for the next session. So everybody probably thinks of it game to game, but there's also trainings in between that as well. So a refined session, the night before a game might be a little bit more movement focused, where players want to feel a little bit better, or, you know, some teams and in some cases have used some priming strategies, which I would see partly as part of the refine 4-hour framework within the other 22 hours, but it also ties into training solutions that Martin and Ben will speak a little bit more about as well on the other episodes. So that's where I see all of the different focus blocks connecting up.
I know you said these are not in like individual days. The 4 hours aren't day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. But is there any particular examples or scenarios where one of them may be elongated or one of them may be shortened for whatever reason?
Yes, another analogy I'll steal from Bryce would be the accordion analogy. So the 4 hours being like, it can be shorter or longer. So I like that one. But I mean, a typical turnaround you get in international football would be match day +1, match day -1, and match day. So 2 days between a game. So in that instance, and in some previous examples that I've experienced, the react phase would be on the match day. So straight after the game, what are the recovery, nutrition, sleep interventions that we can provide? The day after, match day +1, I would see as a blend of regenerate and restore. So that may be a mix of group session, regenerate session, and then also some individual options for them to do later on in the day. And then the match day -1 is a mix of restore and refine. So maybe what you do pre-training still has a slight restore and recovery focus, but is obviously trying to prepare them for the training session that they need to complete on the match day -1. And then the match day -1 in the evening, that's probably about refining their recovery and priming them or preparing them for the next day, which goes back into match day again. So that's probably an example of a 2-day turnaround where you fit the 4-hour framework into 2.5 days, but still all of the concepts and the framework is still there. It just it flexes depending on the turnaround of the fixtures.
When you talked about giving the players choice and giving them choice is more likely to have some sort of positive effect, is there anything that you do to measure the effect, even if it's just subjective, so they can be aware of, okay, yeah, last week I did feel better for doing that cold water immersion, therefore this week I'm going to do it again? Is there anything that you do to measure that feeling from the guys and girls?
Yeah, well, one is just feedback. Even speaking to players, like I've had it plenty of times with ice baths. Some players just do it because they know they feel better. Some players hate it, but then when they get out, I say, how do you feel? And the next morning they say, I feel much better. So they kind of know, okay, there's a little bit of short-term pain for hopefully a bit of medium-term gain. In terms of like monitoring it, we'll use our wellness system as part of helping track that. So example being on a previous camp a couple of months ago, we'd look at total recovery scores, I guess, from a match day -1 or a heavy training day. And in some cases, you want recovery to drop, because if you're trying to elicit a heavy stimulus, you need to make sure that it's actually causing a stress stimulus on the players. But if you put in a recovery day, for example, on a camp after a game or after a heavy training session, you obviously want to try to see a bounce back of recovery. So using that, that's based off some subjective questionnaire that the players do every day on camp. So using that alongside, just individual conversation with players and feedback, that's kind of how I would use it anyway.
Mm-hmm. So when you say your subjective questionnaire, is that quite generic? Is that kind of, you've manipulated something to make it bespoke for your guys? Does that differ across age groups? Does it get more complex or more refined as you go up? How does that subjective stuff look?
No, that'd be one of the consistent ones used across men's and women's pathways as well. So again, it's one of the projects that our department would have done, and Callum, one of the physicists, has led on that along with Rich Aikenhead as well. So they've set up a consistent wellness framework across men's and women's pathways. So that's been used across both pathways. Yeah.
Cool. Just bringing you back in, Chris, and linking into that choice aspect, because I'm really interested in that from what Pete said. How crucial is that from a nutrition point of view to offer that choice to keep everyone happy, but get the most benefit of what's available?
Well, yeah, obviously it is important. I mean, not everyone is going to want the same food, have the same taste preferences. So, for the I guess the products that are available, there's always there's definitely choices there. And for the nature of the food provision that we do provide, the nature of buffets, for example, then there's freedom of choice. Where we try to influence that is through the education around the fuel formation. So, okay, it's a buffet, but what we're trying to focus on now, and through the education, that's where then we want to aspire and influence into a better choice in that dining room. So if it's recovery, to be looking for the repair formation, for example. If it's a high fuel, it's constructing the high fuel formation. So yeah, choice is crucial, and it's our job to try and steer them around making that choice more specific to what they need it for.
Just going back to you, Chris, on the curriculum side, I'm really interested to dive a little bit deeper. And there'll be plenty of coaches out there who hear the word curriculum and think, "Oh, that's beyond me. I'll maybe package it in a different way, but don't call it curriculum because it sounds pretty intense." But how did you go about the research behind that, and that, I suppose, foundational work that you went into to start to develop this?
Yeah, so I guess pick up where I jumped in earlier on in the conversation. I kind of start again, so apologies if I repeat myself, but I guess it all makes sense. Yeah, so I think it's quite a scary term, I guess, because it's in terms of sport. I mean, I've 11, 12 years now in professional sports as a performance nutritionist, and I've never really seen, or I've never been part of curriculum delivery in the nature of this. You think curriculums, you kind of generally think schools. And we all deliver in all our practice, whatever we've done in the past. You're all delivering a curriculum as such, but it's probably never been packaged in this way. Certainly not in my experience. So the start was actually thinking, what do I want to deliver? Start right at the beginning, where it was nutrition. What do we want to deliver? We had an idea of what we wanted to deliver, and then the first start point was just scribbling all that down, thinking, okay, what are the performance outcomes that we're trying to support, and where does nutrition fit into that? And I remember going through that process. I had a spreadsheet of all this stuff of one page, and I initially naively thought, well, that's my curriculum. But then actually, when I started to check and challenge that with curriculum experts, it became very clear very quickly that was the tip of the iceberg at best. So it was at that point that I thought I need to reach out here and find some expertise. So lots of research, lots of stuff online. Found a great paper of an individual in America that created a nutrition curriculum that I was able to look at that and think, okay, that's looking more likely. I'm looking at stuff now like a curriculum faculty. I've never considered that. Every school has a faculty. So do we need something like that? Learning outcomes. What actually are learning outcomes, and how are they different? How do they then link to the objectives? And all these things started to become more clear that actually it's more than just what you're going to do, it's how you're going to do it. So I then stumbled across a brilliant podcast. I'm a big listener of podcasts, and Pete's heard me tell this story too many times. And I was doing my research, and I just typed in my podcast search curriculum, and literally like bingo, how would you look? The curriculum podcast turned up. So I thought, this is easy. Like, this is super easy. So, kid, you know, I've listened to it. I think it's episode 77. I've listened to every one. Brilliant podcast. So I listened to that, and I just started getting into that. It definitely sparked a fire within me around, this is it. Okay, this is making sense. I know what I want to create, and these are the kind of experts I need to speak to. So I got in touch with those, and I initially thought, I'll see if we can get some budget together and pay them to make it for us. And that would have been way too easy. And they said, we can't do that. It's out of scope. But what you can do is go on our website, and they've got 6 steps of curriculum design, which has now become my...
the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Associated with the 6 steps of curriculum design. So I worked through that. I took the 6 steps of curriculum design from a primary school curriculum, looked at that and thought, right, I'm going to follow those and create my own version of it. It's not going to be exactly the same, because Ofsted aren't going to come and audit it anytime soon. You never know. It might go that way. But I can create my own version. So that was the first start. So the 6 steps of curriculum design, it's okay. Step 1, what's the principle and purpose of your school, your department? Once you've got that, you know where you're going. Then you can start to build something called curriculum intent. So what's your intention with your delivery? What's it going to be kind of coloured by? Then how would you achieve in curriculum terms breadth and balance of your delivery, that's specific to what you want? Then what do your teaching outcomes look like? What does your concept look like? Stage 5 and stage 6, it's about how do you review and evaluate the efficacy of what you're delivering. So I went through those 6 steps, and that's where then going back to Bryce's podcast, Pick, Train, Play, that was easy, because we had our stage 1, we had our vision, well articulated by Bryce, department bought into that, Pick, Train, Play, the philosophy. So then that was absolutely crucial, because I think without that clarity, and the great work as well that Martin and Ben had done alongside Bryce, really getting clarity on our vision, that made it very easy for me then to start to shape the direction, because that was done. So I knew where we were going as a department. The challenge was how are we going to deliver it? There's all these disciplines and different levels of delivery. There's gym-based stuff, pitch-based stuff, nutrition. How are we going to kind of package that up and create something that's meaningful? And we always want to do is inspire and influence players. So how are we going to do that? So through conversations, this is where it became a bigger piece of work. Through conversations with members of the team, it was, what do we want this to look like? What do we want our players who receive this education? What's it going to be like? And quite clearly, it was about immersive. It's a very immersive content. It's not a school. It's a curriculum, but it's not a school as you sit down and you get talked at. We don't want it to be that. It's very specific, and all our teaching is immersive. So we were very clear on that. Wants to be immersive learning for the players, so it's something they can feel. So we then looked at, okay, how do we break this down? How do we achieve breadth and balance with what we're delivering? And that's where the term focus blocks was established. So we didn't want to call them lessons or topics or themes. And I've used in previous practice, previous roles, it's focus blocks is a term that I've used. So we then assigned focus blocks. So that's where we started to develop our faculty, because again, this needs a faculty, but who forms part of that faculty? At the minute, it's just me. So we pulled in someone from FA Education to get an educator's eye on it, a teacher, someone called Kim Hyde, who was a great addition to that, who really got me thinking about education. And then we brought in, obviously, Martin Evans, Ben Rosenblatt, because there was definitely going to be a component on the physical components of delivery, so physical capability, training solutions. We brought in James Hairsign, who was leading on periodization, and then Ruth and Pete on the other 22 hours, and there was myself and James Moorhen leading on nutrition. So there we had our 5 focus blocks. So that's how we achieved some breadth and balance of our delivery through strategic selection of these focus blocks that we were going to deliver on to help us achieve our vision. So that was, I say it was easy. It was difficult to get to that point, but once we got to that point, the big challenge then was working with these focus block owners and putting together a framework where they could go away and independently write the outcomes and content for their focus blocks was over to them. So the framework was put in place, and we had a very clear understanding of how to write and how to put together learning outcomes, which I learned from school education, and this is what it looks like. So at 15s, it's about being able to list and describe, list and differentiate something. As you go further down, it's about, at the senior level, it's about being able to critique it and deliver it autonomously. So then, once you've got those outcomes, that definitely has an impact on what you're going to propose to deliver. So it took a long time working with the focus block owners to write very clear learning outcomes for each level of the pathway they were delivered to. And then it was a case, right, so how we're going to deliver it, because we have to connect. You've talked a lot before about how do you get the players to engage. What we put in place, which is in the curriculum, was this element of how we connect. So it's around every kind of lesson that we deliver. We follow this kind of three-pronged approach where it's what's the analogy that we use? There's an analogy. We all use analogies all the time in our delivery. So in nutrition, for example, it's like we use a sponge analogy for glycogen. If you fill the sponge full of water, you're filling that with glycogen, or the car analogy. So what are the common analogies that we're all using? We all pulled them together. What case studies have we all got from our delivery? Because we've all delivered. Without this curriculum, we've all delivered areas, and we've done some really great work. How can we capture these case studies to show actually that this is possible? So hook them in with the analogy. That sounds good. So Project 60, how would you connect? What's the case study that shows that it's real and doable? And the final piece is we're collecting lots of data, and there's lots of science out there. What's the underpinning science and data to show them that it's real? And if you get all those things together, that then directly goes into how we then plan to deliver the sessions and how the focus block owners will choose what they deliver. And then it's a case of what resources do they need, simple as that. What do they need to deliver it? Every focus block is very unique because it'll be different. How it will be delivered will be different. What do they need? And then those kind of 6 pieces all put together, that helps kind of the delivery be coherent, because it's all created from the same methodology, and it's all connected to the vision. And then the final stage of the curriculum is how we assess it. So it's all great having a great curriculum, looks great, but how do you know it's been successful? So like the first iteration of the curriculum was assessing, did we deliver it? Simple as that, yes or no. It's hard to assess everything. But first and foremost, can we assess ourselves? Do we deliver it? And the stage that I'm working on now is, how can we assess it? How can we demonstrate that it's actually changing the behaviour? So that's the kind of the top line process of the 6 stages that help create the framework. And now we're in a situation where we're starting to deliver it.
Rob, if I jump in, sorry, just when you said about, some coaches might hear curriculum and think, oh my God, this is that's scary. I remember when I did join and started working with Ruth and Ben Young on the Other 22 Hours project, one of the things that Chris did task us with was, as a focus block owner of Other 22 Hours, the developing and establishing the objectives and outcomes, learning outcomes of the Other 22 Hours. And I remember at the time, it was difficult because myself, Ruth and Ben went into a room, we were whiteboarding how this fits in and stuff, and we were banging our head against the wall in SGP. But then as we did it, it gave me real clarity on, well, for each age group, okay, these are the learning outcomes and objectives. This is how we're going to measure it. It was actually really, really useful process to go through. It was difficult, of course, and challenging, and probably annoying for Chris because we kept going back to him about, how is this going to fit and how is this going to work? But yeah, it was a little bit scary to admit of trying to fit this in. But now that we've used it and we went through that process, it definitely gave me a lot of clarity on this project. And the second point I want to say around the case studies as well was, I think that goes for both players and coaches. Like, again, the example around the recovery scores and stuff after recovery day, like I've shared some of that with coaches before and staff, and said, look, this is the effect of the recovery day on how the players feel after it. So like, it's almost evidence to the player as well, but also to the coaching staff, and say, look, when we've gone hard, we've had a heavy training day, an internal match, for example, if we have a recovery day after that, it actually allows them to recover so that we can then perform again the next training day and the next match day as well. So using those case studies, they're obviously player facing as well, but I think that's another example of sharing with the staff as well.
Would you both, and I'll come to you first, Chris, and I'll get your opinion, Pete, very, very quickly before I let you guys go. But would you recommend everyone in, no matter what level of club, maybe not to the depths that you've gone to, but setting up something like this and going through the process that you've gone through, maybe listening to the Curriculum podcast episode number 77 and going through that process so it's super, super clear, not only for the person, because it might be a one-man band, but enabling then to pass to someone like Pete, who has a specialism in a certain area, and going, this is the way we're going to go, fill these blocks, fill these gaps that I've created.
Good question. I'm biased because I'm so excited by curriculum myself. I would say yes. I guess it comes down to individual circumstance, doesn't it? The environment that you're in, the constraints that you've got, resource available. I think that if you're trying to deliver, if you've got a very clear vision and purpose, and you want to deliver it across various, I guess, groups in a consistent way, and you want to demonstrate that your delivery is meaningful, then this kind of approach, I would say is the way to go. I think what we would, for us as a department, is give us a common language, like curriculum, focus blocks, common language, which we all understand, and it's made delivery more deliberate. So lesson plans, we all focus block owners have to create lesson plans. Not saying that they look at the lesson plan and like robots delivering it, but actually it makes them think about them learning outcomes and makes that delivery more deliberate, because that's based on a considered process to help the player get from A to B in a given area. So from that point of view, if it gives you clarity, helps your message be consistent, and helps you be more deliberate and demonstrate what you're doing is valuable, then from that point of view, then I would say without a doubt, yes, it's worth considering. What's your opinion on that, Pete?
It'd be pretty similar to Chris, to be honest. Like, it depends on a lot of those factors. But to me, I think even before that, you need to, like you said, have a really clear vision. And to be honest, even when I joined, like, that was one of the things that stood out to me. Being I think the last person to join the department was, like, the vision was very clear from the outset. So as soon as I joined, I knew what we were trying to achieve as the department. And then because of the way it fit into the pick, train, play model and the different focus blocks, that gave me real clarity on what I knew I had to do. So what to say, it was challenging, like developing and thinking in that curriculum way. It was definitely advantageous for us as a department in our setting and environment and constraints. But I think it just, the step before is like getting the real clarity on the vision, why we're doing things, what we're about as a department and stuff. So that was probably the first step, and that really helped me when I joined.
Nice. I can certainly relate to that from just a business processes point of view as well. That might be. I'm going to listen to episode 77 and dive into the curriculum. Because I instantly, I think there's so much that can transfer into various different environments, whether it's a performance team in a football club or it's been clear about how to run a podcast and do businessy things. So yeah, I appreciate that. But guys, where's the best place for people to catch up with you if they want to dive into more of these topics or know what else you've got going on PhD wise, Pete, etc.? Where's the best place to catch you? I'll go to you first, Pete.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. So if anyone wants to send me a message, inbox is always open and always happy to chat.
Cool. Do you know what your Twitter handle is?
Peter Tierney 93, I think. But
nice.
I'll have to double check. I think it is. Good that. Yeah.
I think it might be.
Yeah.
Chris, what's the best place for people to get in touch with you? All things curriculum, of course.
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's all. That's the only platform I use. So just Chris Rosimus on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your time, guys. Really appreciate you coming on, and this has been an excellent addition to the unofficial 3-part FA series. So I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Cheers, Rob.
Cheers, Rob.
Cheers.